Hello, my name is Father James Kelleher, and I'm a priest in the Society of Our Lady of the Most Holy Trinity. And I'm the founder and director of Eucharistic Family Rosary Crusade. I do Rosary Crusades all over the United States, England, Ireland, and even in Central America. And today I'd like to talk to you about St. Thomas Aquinas and the Most Holy Eucharist. St. Thomas Aquinas is perhaps the greatest theologian of all time. I'd like to first go through a little bit of a short biography of his life and then of his teaching on the real presence of Jesus in the Eucharist and Eucharistic adoration. St. Thomas Aquinas was born in 1225 in southern Italy. He was born to a prominent family there, and he first went to school at the famous Benedictine monastery called Monte Cassino. And there he learned much of the faith at the hands of the Benedictines. When he was 19 years old, the Lord had been speaking deeply into his heart. And Thomas found this tremendous desire to become a member of the Dominican order, which at that time around the 1240s, the Dominican order was a brand new order in the church. But his parents had had a different plan for Thomas. They had wanted him to become the abbot of Monte Cassino. Well, this was a major battle between Thomas and his parents. So one day, Thomas just left the family home and went towards Rome, where he was going to enter the Dominicans. Well, halfway there, two of his brothers caught up with him, basically kidnapped him and took him back to his parents' home, where he was locked in a castle room for a year. His parents were hoping that they could break Thomas down. But Thomas continued his life of prayer, spent some of his time teaching the faith to his sisters, and resisted any of the temptations that his family tried to throw his way. He was convinced his call was to be a Dominican. Finally, after 1 year of this imprisonment, his mother was getting a little embarrassed by the whole thing herself, and so she set it up that Thomas could secretly escape from the room through a window and leave the castle, and they didn't send the brothers after him this time. And so Thomas arrived in Rome and began his life as a Dominican. Now, most of us are aware that the life of a Dominican is a life of prayer, study, and preaching. So the Dominicans sent Thomas to the University of Paris, which was the foremost Catholic university in the world. And there he studied under a great Dominican saint named St. Albert the Great. In the classroom, Thomas was a very quiet, humble student. He was also a man of ample girth. He was big. He was like a NFL lineman. But he hardly ever talked at all in class, so some of his classmates began to make fun of him. And they even gave him a nickname. They nicknamed him the Dumb Ox. Well, Thomas, being a man of humility, never challenged what they were doing. He just absorbed it, offered it up. But St. Albert the Great, who was his professor and would read Thomas's papers and converse with him, he realized that Thomas was actually a theological genius. And so one day in class he said, "This man who you consider the dumb ox, one day his teaching will bellow throughout Europe and the world, and will be known everywhere." And that's exactly what happened. Thomas first became a teacher at the University of Cologne, another famous university, then he became a teacher at the University of Paris. Thomas spent his relatively short life, he died before the age of 50, mainly writing and teaching. And his major theological work was called the Summa Theologica, which is basically a presentation of Catholic theological thought. And so Thomas would pray, and then he would write. Then he would pray and write. He had a great devotion to Jesus in the Eucharist. He had such a deep devotion to Jesus in the Eucharist that sometimes in the presence of Jesus in the Eucharist, he would actually levitate. His body would actually rise off the ground as he adored the Lord. And one day when he was doing this prayer, the Lord Jesus spoke to him from the crucifix and said to Thomas, "Thomas, you have spoken well of me. What reward would you like?" And Thomas's answer was very simple and direct. "Nothing but you, Lord." Thomas understood that Jesus in the Eucharist is everything for you and me. And the more time that you and I spend with Jesus in the Eucharist, first by receiving him at the Mass, where he transforms us, he makes us like himself. That's the power of the Eucharist. He turns us into saints. And if we think about the Eucharist as Thomas taught it and presented it, the Eucharist is the memorial of the passion of Jesus Christ. And so when you and I receive Jesus in the Eucharist, we have a personal encounter with the crucified and risen Lord. We're taken deep into the mystery that you and I have been bought at a very high price. We've been bought at the price of the blood of the Lamb. And so when we prepare to receive Jesus in the Eucharist, we want to humble ourselves. We want to recognize that everything in our life comes from him, and that without him, you and I are nothing. Ave Maria.